All right. Well, hello. Welcome to our second interview of this month for the healing talks that we're having with leaders from our USD community. A few weeks ago, we had Mario Echeverria, my PhD student colleague, interview Gabriel Nunez Soria and Dr. Medina, talking about sacred purpose and healing. Today I have two very special guests with me. My name is Jennifer Soriano Manglicmot, and I am coming to you from Sacred Kumeyaay land, and I am also a PhD student in the Education for Social Justice program in the Department of Learning and Teaching at SOLS, the School of Leadership and Educational Sciences at USD. I want to introduce my guests. And first, my guests are from the Center for Restorative Justice at USD. And I'm very happy that they could join us for this conversation today. Welcome, Dr. Karp and Tomay. Douglas, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I have to say, I've been really excited to have this conversation with you for quite a while. You recognize in my hand here a work of your labor and love, Dr. Karp. I also have this book that is one of the resources that is on your website for the Center for Restorative Justice. A little bit about me. I came to this work 17 years ago, started working in my sacred purpose as an educator, both in institutional educational spaces as well as educational organizations on Native Ohlone land and Native Kumeyaay land, which is now known as occupied San Diego and San Francisco territories. I've been working in education and thinking a lot about the ways that we can bring more healing into these spaces that can at times seem very damaging to the souls that pass through these institutions that have been set up since the beginning of the institutionalization of education in this country. I want to invite you to tell the audience how you came to the work of restorative justice. So I guess we'll start with you, Dr. Karp.
Okay. All right, sure. I have been at it a while, since the late 1990s. I was doing a postdoc in Washington, D.C., and I went to a conference that was hosted by the Department of Justice for grantees. So the grantees were presenting, and one of the grantees was the Vermont Department of Corrections. And I happened into the session, but then I became enamored with their project, which was launching a statewide restorative justice program. And then I soon after got a job at Skidmore College in upstate New York, which is an hour from Vermont, and reconnected with those presenters and said, I'm a new professor, I need to do research. I loved your program, can I help? And at that time they had launched it, but hadn't done any evaluation research. And so I did both quantitative and qualitative evaluation. And one of the things was that I did was run around the state with students filming these restorative justice processes. And so then I was able to really see how powerful they could be. Also, I saw, what doesn't work, and what an unskillful process might look like. But most of all, I was really impressed by what what occurred. So that was my start.
Nice. So all the way on the East Coast, a ways from here. Tomay, how did you get started in this work?
Sure. So initially, I came to the work because I was working with young people, and I just wanted a way to elevate their voices. And I just did some research. I wasn't trained in it, so I just started trying to model what I read. But then I saw the opportunity to actually participate in a healing circle. And I said, well, let me try this, because for me, it was the understanding that I was just learning this process so I can help the young people. But once I actually went through the healing process for myself in a circle, it was something that just I was like immediately drawn to it and said, I want to do more. I want to know more. So I became trained in it. And then I started doing healing circles myself. And then I escalated and got more involved. And I'm also doing facilitation for justice, restorative justice and education, K through 12. Mm-hmm. And finally, through that pathway, I was able to get connected to Dr. Karp. And voila, I'm here at the Center for Restorative Justice.
Very cool. Very cool. So thinking about restorative justice and healing and, the circle process and the journey that the participants go through, Dr. Karp, how have you seen, you've been in this for quite a while, how have you seen the restorative justice movement evolve?
Sometimes maybe I can't distinguish between how I've evolved or as I grow to learn more about what's happening across the world. And so I'm changing, and it's hard to tell what's the difference between me changing and what has changed in the movement. But for sure, when I got started, I could say confidently that I was an expert in restorative justice because not that much was being published, and I could read everything that was being published. So that gave me a lot of academic confidence. And now over 250 research articles are published every year, books and books and books. That's just in English. And so I have completely lost any kind of academic confidence that I once had because I can't keep up. And it's so the movement has grown exponentially. That's one thing. There is recognition now that the movement means that it's a broad umbrella inclusive of a variety of traditions and practices that share a philosophy but unfold in different ways and respond to different issues. I would say in general, when I began, the focus was pretty exclusively on criminal justice issues. Mm-hmm. And now that's, it's so much more embedded within educational systems and in other arenas that's just a significant change in the way people think about expertise or even what academic disciplines should be paying attention to restorative justice. So it's actually very exciting. I had no idea that it would grow as much as it has. And then I would say just one last thing is there was in the beginning much more of a micro focus on restorative justice, meaning there was an individual incident and somebody caused harm to somebody else. And the focus was on what was that harm and what can that person do to make amends for that harm. And now there's so much more attention to the larger issues surrounding the incidents, like what were the conditions that enabled that incident to occur in the first place, and how do we address that, and what are the ripple effects of that incident beyond the two people involved to their social networks or larger communities. And so how do we address these kinds of collateral ripple effect harms? So I think there's much more attention to the broader harms than there ever was before.
Wow. 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 That's so, Dr. Karp, I'm so glad you brought up that evolution from the micro to the macro root causes of what is creating these harms between, interpersonal, between person to person, but also how do these interpersonal conflicts connect to the larger context, right, of what's happening systemically and within the institutions. To me, what are some examples of maybe some things that you've seen since you've gotten started in this work that have reflected, this connection of, interpersonal relationships to the larger, structural and institutional and systemic causes for those harms in the first place?
So I'll say from working in the educational system, K through 12, that it's a shift in not really using restorative justice only to manage, like for classroom management, for an example. That was an idea of what it could be used for. And now it expanded where it's incorporating teachers actually understanding how they can use that circle process for themselves. So you see it going from that micro of even just having that narrow vision of this is something we do for the children, to now saying this is something that we can also do for the staff, for the teachers, so we can actually connect and build relationships with the students. So I would say that is the thing that has really changed for me. And instead of looking at it as a response to disciplining a student, it's now, focused on building relationship with those students.
Relationships. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That connection to K-12 and education and that process of moving it from this, this thing of management to actually this thing of centering relationships in terms of, helping people grow in the processes of how we relate to each other. I wanted to ask both of you, what are some broad misconceptions that folks have about restorative justice or RJ work that you've addressed as experts in this field?
Tomay, you want to go first this time? Because I don't always have to go first.
Great.
Okay, sure, Dr. Karp. So I would definitely say one thing that I would say is oh boy, this is good. A misconception about RJ is that RJ is this touchy-feely, kumbaya, we let people off the hook type of intervention. And it's not that at all. To actually do this work, it means that you have to, so even engaging from the perspective of building a relationship, that's difficult too. When you come into a space, you don't know people, they don't know who you are. You have to build this safety so people can feel comfortable to begin to share and trust that what they're sharing won't be used against them, right? So it's not this kumbaya. It's hard, right? It's heavy lifting. And then when you think about it from the perspective of working with someone who caused harm, that's not letting anyone off the hook, because when you think about Danielle Surratt in her book, Until We Reckon, I believe that's the name of it. And we use that in the certificate program. She speaks of, persons, for an example, going to prison. They're the ones that are actually being let off the hook because they're not acknowledging the pain, the impact that was caused to the person who caused harm. And also, they're not even being able to identify those enablers that sent them in that pathway, to cause harm. So it's nothing easy about RJ work. It's really having to face your pain, having to acknowledge if you cause pain, and then I love what she says. taking responsibility and doing sorry. So it's not about just saying, I'm sorry I did this, but actually taking action to repair the harm that you caused. So there's nothing kumbaya about that at all. And one last thing before Dr. Karp goes, it's this misconception that RJ is only exclusive to either the criminal justice system or the educational system, and it's not. It's really expansive. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Dr. Karp.
Thank you. Wow.
You know, I would echo what Tomay said in terms of meaningful accountability is hard work in RJ, and we, most of my direct experience with RJ is with college students who've gotten in trouble and are going through an RJ process. And I could say that it's very difficult for them to talk about their RJ experience because what they expect is punishment. That's what, when you get in trouble, you expect punishment. And then when they participate, and no matter how many different ways you try to explain it in advance, they still just expect punishment. And then they go through this process that is, as Tomay said, is hard. It's really, our systems are designed in our society for people to deny and avoid responsibility. That's what we're saying, as we do right up front, is say nothing, deny everything. Only good things will come if you can get away with avoiding responsibility. Plead not guilty. And only bad things will happen if you say you did the thing that was wrong. When you have this opportunity to actually take responsibility, it's transformative and a huge relief for so many people. Like, oh my God, there's something I could do. I do actually feel remorseful. And now I have a pathway to win my way back into the community. I don't have to be in this fight with everyone where they're saying these things about me and I'm trying to deny them. But in fact, I can reconnect with them and take responsibility. So when you walk away from a process like that, it's hard to talk about because it's simultaneously hard. We don't have the language for it because we have the language of punishment. And it ends up being very reconnecting or supportive. And so that you feel more connected to the community afterwards. So when you walk away feeling better, and then people would say, oh, well, then it must have been soft because you must have gotten away with it. And if you feel worse, punishment, then you must have been held accountable and it was tough. So it's a whole new language to think about. So it's an understandable misconception that RJ is soft, but it's a real one. I would also say another really important misconception is that RJ is reduced to a face-to-face facilitated dialogue between a person who's caused harm and a person who was harmed. And so it's one particular method or practice. There are, in fact, many different kinds of practices from all over the world with different names and styles and cultural traditions, but they vary. So it's not reducible, and so those of us who are deep into the field really prefer to think of RJ not as a particular practice, but as a philosophy or as an approach that says, instead of focusing on, who caused what and what are we going to do to punish them, it's focused on what happened, what was the impact of that, how were people affected, what needs do they have given the harms that they've experienced, and how can we work together to identify the best path forward. So that's very open-ended and vague in some ways, but it best captures the philosophy. And then there's room within that to say it's not just about incidents of harm, but when we talk about climate culture right now in Souls, we're having a lot of conversations about race and the learning climate. And so we're not necessarily talking about an individual incident where someone did something, but overall, is this a place where everybody feels welcome, or everybody feels empowered to speak their perspective? Is everybody's voice is heard equally in the classroom, outside the classroom? Does everybody have the same opportunities for learning, or career opportunities ultimately that come out of the program? So space for us to explore the larger questions of harm or inequity is part of the philosophy, and not, again, boiled down to a particular practice.
Right. Wow. You both made me think of a lot of things. One thing in particular is the way that you describe it as a philosophy, and a philosophy that encompasses, a very, very wide range of things in our society that need healing. And so Dr. Karp, you mentioned that in Souls, there's been a lot of conversations about race, and in race and healing, what does restorative justice mean within this year of 2020 around everything that has happened up until today, within the context of Black Lives Matter and anti-racist movements? Where does restorative justice fit into all of this?
Yeah, go ahead, Tomay.
So, thank you for passing that to me, Dr. Karp. So when we think about racial justice intersecting, is that where we're going with this one?
We're going there, yes. Yes.
So I think about that it's similar in terms of what the Black Lives Movement is essentially saying. It's basically, and not to reduce it to one simple sentence, because it's I can't do that, but basically saying, hear our voice, hear our needs, hear our humanity. And that's what restorative justice speaks to, giving people the opportunity to have their voices heard, and then to share what the harm has been to them, and then to share their needs. And really looking at it from, I know that, let me see if I can pronounce his name right, Dr. Sean Ginwright.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yes. So he speaks about healing as something that it's not new, and it's something that's needed because it helps bring our community together. And he also incorporates restorative justice as part of that, understanding that in order for us to move forward, the pathway forward must include healing using restorative justice as this model that encompasses all voices, whether it's a dissenting voice, a discouraged voice, an empowered voice, that they all can come together collectively and be heard, and be able to, in his words, ask those new questions. Not just keep saying, what can we do to put a Band-Aid on what's happening right now? To just pacify what people are feeling, underneath the pressure of this climate that we're in, but really to ask those questions of, how can we begin to dismantle the structural, the institutional, and individualized racism that exists in our society today? And restorative justice, I love restorative justice, so I'm always going to promote restorative justice as that philosophy, that model, that framework that we can use to have those deep conversations where we can come together and not just have conversations, but take steps to act on those things that we see we can do individually and on a structural level as well.
Wow. It's like love in action. Putting love in action. Dr. Karp?
You know, it's a hard question. I mean, some of the easy answers is that that the movements have a lot in common, and that they, in a sense, need one another. Certainly, the RJ movement needs to be part of the larger movement for racial justice. I mean, it needs to learn from it, basically. The racial justice movement is, is a movement that is challenging structural inequalities, and it's not a movement with one method or one message. It's lots of people doing lots of different things, but it's a movement that is making demands. For example, like defund police as a demand, right? It's a saying this is no longer acceptable, the way that police are funded, and things have to be done differently. RJ doesn't make demands, so it's different in a fundamental way than an activist movement. It's an approach, as I mentioned before, or a philosophy that says we won't make progress unless there is a truly collaborative decision-making space that allows for people to really come to understand one another's perspectives. And so RJ is more of a style or a way of being in the world. And so it's applicable to any kind of difficulty or situation, and not linked to one particular movement agenda. So that's one thing that's kind of a distinction. And there are certainly many situations in which you'd say, well, I don't see where RJ is relevant to this situation. In other words, like, if RJ is premised on people listening to each other, and one side is not willing to listen, then it's hard to move forward in a restorative way.
Right.
And so it's not applicable for every situation, every moment. That's why social movements use different tools and strategies to get the attention, that is needed. And a lot of those are actually much more confrontational than an RJ approach would be. I would say another thing that's just that the racial justice movement, or the social justice movements more generally, have challenged restorative justice to be more macro-oriented than they have been. One of the distinctions that's emerged is between restorative justice and transformative justice, or the RJ movement and the TJ movement.
Okay.
And some people would say the difference between the two is that RJ is the micro, as I said before, like focused on just victim and offender, and that TJ is about the big structural issues, historical harms. I don't particularly like that distinction. It's kind of a forced choice between the two, when I think a good RJ process should be paying attention to both. And in fact, I would say it's a flawed RJ process if there isn't attention to both, that it stays only in the micro. So the movement challenging RJ about the larger issues and attending to them is, has been really essential to the growth of the movement. And so that's meant, that the RJ movement has become much more diverse, much more open. There are really important debates in the movement about access, like who gets, not only who gets RJ, but who gets to offer RJ, and who gets denied the opportunity to be an RJ practitioner or a facilitator. And so the TJ movement, I think where it's really made a mark is not the distinction between the micro and the macro, but between inside and outside the system. And so this is the distinction I like to make between RJ and TJ. That RJ is primarily about methods to use within systems, within a school community, within a the criminal legal system, within the church, whatever it is, there's organizations and there's larger institutions, and RJ operates within those, or is reform-minded. And TJ is really outside of systems. And so their primary method they call is a community accountability process. And what is meant by that is that it's the community itself that undertakes the effort to make sure that there is accountability for harm that's caused. The community is not going to give that responsibility over to some system, whether it's a principal or the police or some other system that is basically distrusted. And so they're saying, we can do this ourselves. There's method, and we don't need to rely on systems that we can't trust will treat us fairly.
It's like, Dr. Karp, it's like where it started, when you got into the field with, it being person to person, that power of relation. And there are so many nuances because, we all come and have different experiences when we come into that circle. And for that facilitation, this leads me to things that I read in your book and started learning about the facilitation process and the nitty-gritty of what goes on when we finally have a group of people within that circle that are ready to dig in and go through this hard process of reconciliation. And it takes a lot of trust and a lot of expertise on your part as the facilitator, which brings me to my next question about multipartial facilitation and restorative justice, and how can this support community building and challenging the status quo within that circle, like you said, bringing in that that acknowledgement that there are structural forces that have brought these people to the circle, that have influenced people in the circle to carry out the harms that have happened. So what exactly is multipartial facilitation?
I can start out on this one just because, it's part of the jargon change over time.
Okay.
So in RJ is often put under the umbrella of alternative dispute resolution. Mm-hmm. So that would include mediation and arbitration and other things that happen outside of, like the distinction is courts where places where some authority makes the decision about what's going to happen, not the key stakeholders involved. They lose their power to decide what happens. In an RJ process or in mediation, it's the parties themselves that generate the agreement. And so they're fully empowered to decide what happens. So that's a fundamental feature of these kinds of ADR processes. We in our, Tomay read this, but in our course, we have a reading by Robert Yazzie, who is a Navajo judge, and talks about Navajo justice. And he says restorative justice is not ADR, it's ODR. It's the original dispute resolution process. So I kind of love that. But sticking to the jargon of the typical legal system, ADR, we train facilitators who assist the parties to come to their own decisions about what will happen. And traditionally, those facilitators are called impartial or neutral. They're not taking a side, right? They're letting the people work it out for themselves. And so the addition of multipartial is saying, as an RJ practitioner, you can't just be kind of distant, flat, neutral, disinterested. You have to be really humanly engaged in the process. You bring yourself as a facilitator to the process, And so multipartial means that you're bringing yourself fully to help all the sides, multipartial, get their needs met. You're not taking sides and you're not disinterested, but you're really actively helping move the process forward for everyone. So that's where that term came from. I don't know what Tomay might want to add to that.
No, I think you just described it perfectly. So I won't touch perfection in that sense.
Wow. It seems like a very democratic, everybody brings in their voices and all voices and perspectives are considered, including the facilitators.
Right. I'll just add one thing.
Yeah, please.
Because it's something that I do when I facilitate, for an example, a racial healing circle. And it's different sides, different people, different opinions, experiences. And I often say that while I'm facilitating this process, I'm still sitting as a participant in this process. So I'm able to engage them in a way where I can, share my own experience, but just do it in a way that it's not abrasive, because my understanding is that there's already tension sometimes in these racial healing circles. So I can share that, this is very upsetting for me. I can understand. However, it's also helping people to, when you respond from your own perspective, to help them to think about, how can I move forward? Because, I can come to a place of saying, I'm angry, I don't want to talk, I don't want to meet the other side. But then if we're taking that stance, how can we move forward? At some point, someone has to just share from their experience of, I get that, I hear you, and I understand that, but from my perspective, I would blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. To just get people in that space to start thinking differently and then have a different conversation as we, go around in a racial healing circle, for example. Dr. Karp, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking about, one of the students in our master's in higher ed program, I was just having a conversation with about her action research project, which has to do with advancing diversity, equity, inclusion in higher ed. And so she was talking about some kind of standard diversity program work. This is actually work being done on a different campus, not at USD. And how quickly white fragility emerges, or had emerged in that. And she said, it was almost like clockwork predictable. Like you do this, and then you can expect this kind of reaction. So from an RJ perspective, we would want to say, what need is being met by that kind of reaction, which is basically a defensive posture. That when people respond defensively, they're protecting something, right? That's what the point of defensiveness is. And what is it that they're trying to protect? And can we get that need met in a way that's actually productive and not further alienating? And so we dig deeper into trying to help create a space in which people are actually able to speak more authentically. And I would just say, as a general critique to many more adversarial processes, that they don't think that they have the time. None of us think we have the time to do the community building or the trust building that's necessary to get to the more authentic dialogues. And so there's this conception that I'm not heard, so I need to get louder and demand, that I be heard. But when you get louder, some people might listen, but others are more likely to just either get louder in an adversarial way or shut down and withdraw and try and hide from that loudness. And so what is, so RJ is just it, it's less about method and more about asking, what would be helpful here to create a space for more authentic engagement, more where people who, like on the white fragility side of the equation, wouldn't react in this kind of defensive way that shuts down. And I'm learning. I'm always learning. I think I've had I've been lucky and privileged to be in enough RJ circles where I could learn without being kind of forced to be defensive. Like, I'll give an example. I a lot of the early RJ movement is about, at least in the West, like US, Australia, Canada, is about white leaders. My early intellectual heroes, teachers in the movement, are not all, but mostly white. Kate Pranis, Howard Zare, John Braithwaite. There's a guy named Barry Stewart. He's a Canadian judge. He was the first judge to really bring restorative justice to Canada. He was working in an Indigenous community in the Yukon. And he recognized that the Western legal model was not working in this community. And he worked with the elders of the community to do something different. And what they ended up creating was something they called sentencing circles. So there was still a court with a judge and a defense attorney and so forth, but it was in circle, and they passed a talking piece, and there were ceremonial dimensions, and it came out. It's just a very different experience. So I was telling this story in the way I just told it, and somebody challenged me and said, can you name any of the elders in that community that led that effort with Barry Stewart? And I froze, right? I was like, no, I don't know who they are. And he's like, well, why are you centering the white guy? Because you can name Barry Stewart and, and say, oh, he's your, hero, RJ hero. Well, he didn't do this by himself, and these weren't his traditions. So what's that about? So that was for me, just an example of like, oh, I'm centering this. I didn't realize. I thought I was just telling this cool story about a cool guy. So it wasn't in an RJ space. It might have been a lot harder for me to hear that, or to incorporate it, or to think about, or even to go further and go do the research and find out, about Mark Wedge and other people in the community who were those elders. So it's really, we're still on multipartiality. It's really about creating a space where people can hear deeply, learn deeply, hear things about themselves that they might not want to hear, but also open up and hear about perspectives that they, had on both sides, their own, stereotypes about.
Right. So while you were speaking, it made me think of an example in a racial healing circle where a participant emailed me in between the weekly circle and basically said, I think I should drop out. Can we talk? And I said, sure. And it was a white participant. And when we met one-on-one, she started describing how she felt. And, I had to be, bold enough to share with her and say, that's white fragility, and let's unpack that, right? I gave her that space to do that one-on-one. And what came out is, in the prior session we had, someone shared that as a Black man, when they got on the elevator, the white woman got off. And she said she felt bad because that's exactly what she did. And so while we unpacked that, I told her, she said, but I really want to address that. And, in the circle, I just don't know if it's appropriate. And we unpacked that together. And I told her, I said, it is appropriate to go back into that space because we created such a safe circle that they really shared things that I was, amazed that they shared into the space. And when she went back that next week, because she said, well, how do I do it? I said, well, we do check-ins. So when you do your check-in, just simply share what came up for you from the last circle. And we had a powerful circle that session because she shared in her experience, and then ended up, you know, she didn't do it to that Black man that was in the circle, but she actually apologized to him, you know, for, you know, doing it to another Black man, because she understands that, like, in the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are, and we are because I am. We're all interconnected. We're humans together. So I found that to be really powerful. And I think that's also part of, you know, bringing yourself into the space in terms of authenticity, you know, and also using cultural humility, you know, not coming into the space thinking you know everything, you know, because I know sometimes I've had people, you know, well, Black people such and such. How can you know what Black people such and such if you're not sitting in that seat, if you're not having that experience that they're having, if you cannot identify with the pain that they're experiencing from that level, you know? So it's a matter of just having that cultural humility, but holding space for people who are trying to find their way, you know, to the surface of what's truly transformative in terms of healing.
Wow. It seems that it's just this beautiful, the way, you know, you both shared this. It is a truly transformative process, with people coming with their whole selves, and it does seem very hard, but you know, with the right people that have experience in holding these spaces, and navigating through all of the things that can come up during these sessions and pushing forward together. Um, I just wish that we had more of these spaces within the institutions across this country, restorative, you know, justice conversations happening, where people are truly listening and hearing one another, um, and getting to that place where they can, you know, let that wall down, where it's not just a reactive place, but it's from that place of love, you know, that everyone is trying to recognize within themselves and within each other. Wow, very powerful. Thank you so much. We have some time for questions, and we have a lot of listeners, and welcome everyone to this space. I'm going to start with a question from Melissa. She says, if we're in a situation where we, both parties, feel harmed by each other, how can we find someone with RJ skills who can help with an RJ approach to healing?
Can you say the first part again? Was that, read the first part again.
Absolutely. It says, Dr. Karp says, if we're in a situation where we, both parties, feel harmed by each other,
Yeah.
how can we find someone with RJ skills who can help with an RJ approach to healing?
Yeah. So we sometimes call those crossover harms, like I harmed you, but you harmed me. And it's almost always present at some level. Certainly when we start to entertain like larger social conditions and so forth. But when there's like really you know, a direct, like people are in both roles, then RJ process, again, there's many methods and approaches. And so part of it is exploring what would be helpful, you know, like just what would be helpful. And often it's creating space for each person to talk about the impact or the harm that they've experienced, and space for them to acknowledge and take responsibility for harm they've caused. and then space for where do we go from here. Those are a little harder to facilitate than a more standard process where there's pretty clear person who caused harm, clear person who was harmed. And the reason that they're harder is that it starts to get into mediation territory where you're talking about two people in conflict and often ongoing conflict. And a lot of mediation is about helping the parties just hear what the other side is saying, but there's disagreement. A typical RJ process begins with basically an agreement about what happened. We're not arguing about the facts, and it's really beginning with what was the impact of that incident on you, not pointing fingers. You did this to me, no, but you did this to me. So it requires actually another layer of skillful facilitation in those situations. But the premise is always the same. What's the harm? What are your needs? And how can we move forward in a good way?
Thank you. Add on to that?
I didn't hear you. Repeat yourself.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to add on to that about a response to questions? Okay. Thank you. Let's see if we have any more questions in the chat. How do we find the right facilitator or trained mediators? Where does one begin to even?
We get, we're technically not a, like the Center for RJ is not a service center where we come and just get there, like, I've got a case, can you help me?
Right.
But we get those requests a lot because of that question that there isn't obvious pathways. So we get actually requests from all over the country, and they could be large requests like an institution that's having an issue and they want our help, or an individual. I mean, just this week I got one from a young male who was saying he had sexually harassed someone in the past, and he felt very remorseful and wanted to do something to apologize. I mean, he wanted to say, I now realize I was doing this thing and I want to take responsibility for it. And he was saying, what do I do? And so, a premise of restorative justice is that this is a process that both sides want to go into. You can't impose your wishes to make amends on someone who doesn't want to hear from you.
Right.
So you have to find somebody who's willing to do some outreach and explore. Is this something that the person would be interested in or not? And then go forward. So I'm not answering the how do you find the right facilitator question well.
No, it leads into promoting the workshops and the groups that the center has for people, because we're all coming, all our listeners, each and every one of us are working in different spaces where this type of process of coming to, when there is a harm that is done between parties, how do we get in that space with whomever we're working with or living with, and so forth? How do we get in that space of really asking, what needs to be done at this point for us to move forward in a way that is healthy, that is healing? And so if you could maybe talk a little bit more about the workshops and the groups and the trainings, because I know there are a lot of folks listening who have expressed interest.
Well, we in the center and the Department of Leadership Studies, offers the certificate program. And that's designed to give people a strong academic foundation in restorative justice. That's the first course. The second course is the skills to be a facilitator, and the short course is a practicum, so you can practice your skills with, coaching support, from the team. So that's the goal, is to build capacity, right? So that wherever people are, there are people with the ability. And that means, building a very diverse community, because people they want people who can relate to their situation, to be their facilitators. So that's one of the first questions we ask when we're trying to match a facilitator with, a situation. It's like, who are you? Do you need grad student facilitators because you're a grad student? Do you need, BIPOC facilitators? Do you need, so it's gender identity, it's a role, function, all that kind of stuff, that matters. So we offer the certificate. We also offer trainings independent of that. So if you go to our website, you'll see, an upcoming training, and we'll continue to post different kinds of workshop opportunities. And then also in student affairs at USD, there is the Office of Ethical Standards and Restorative Practices. And so there are a lot of trained people at USD that can offer, opportunities and support for issues, but also opportunities for, restorative engagement or participation, or, facilitation practice. So it's a pretty good place to be. We have aspirations to make USD a restorative university, and I have like big ideas about what that would mean, and we're far from that. But one of the things I love about USD is how welcoming it's been to restorative justice as a philosophy, and how the institution has seen it as very consistent with its mission. And I will say that that's not the case everywhere.
Right. I actually dropped the link to you so you can post it for our viewers for the Restorative Justice Center.
Yes.
So they can get information on the trainings, and also you can drop in. And so I do circles for men and females who experience sexual harm and domestic violence. And I only do it in groups. I don't, work one-on-one with anyone. So I can also submit that information, and I can refer out for people who want that one-on-one experience, because I'm also associated with the Restorative Roots Collaborative. So that's something that the practitioners there, if that's the service that they offer, they can actually meet those needs for people seeking assistance.
Nice. Well, we want to thank you both. Just sharing your extensive knowledge and experience with us in the philosophy, and all that encompasses this healing and restorative justice. Just a few days ago, the American Medical Association actually recognizes that, quote, recognizes that racism is in its systemic, structural, institutional, and interpersonal forms is an urgent threat to public health, the advancement of health equity, and a barrier to excellence in the delivery of medical care. So thinking about, medicine and healing, and also, healing in relationship with one another and restorative justice, I wanted to read this from Dr. Fania E. Davis, her book that is one of the resources and key text that is a part of some of the trainings of your program. And she says this, we have reached a historical point in this country where it is clear that if we do not seek both justice and healing, injustice will keep replicating itself ad nauseum, and we will find ourselves intoning this very same social justice demands generation after generation. Taking together restorative justice as a movement, conscious of racial justice and social justice as a movement, conscious of restorative justice, so within each other offer a way forward. So thank you so much for everyone that joined us on this live broadcast. And to those of you who watched the replay, we want you to share this with friends and your community. And we thank you so much. Any last thoughts, Dr. Karp and Tomay, for our audience today?
Tomay?
Last thoughts.
Last thoughts.
Just in the spirit of what you read from Fania Davis, that it's really important that we look at healing the historical harm that we actually house in our bodies that's been transmitted from generation to generation. That's really important for us to take a look at that individually, and it's not something that's just for Black people to look at, but for all of us as a community to look at, because it's about us connecting from humanity to humanity and not necessarily from someone's credential or socioeconomic status, but just as a person. So I just want to offer that.
I'll just say that, you know, with healing as the theme, healing for me is surrounding myself with healing-oriented people. And the RJ community is that for me. So I would really encourage or welcome people to get involved in the, you know, in the larger movement, because it's just a really good place to be in otherwise very difficult times.
Well, thank you both. Sign me up right now. You'll be getting an email from me soon, actually right after this broadcast. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.